So this week in my biology class, we're starting to talk about a whole new unit titled cells. And in one of these chapters, there is a section titled cell boundaries. And I really do like how textbooks are organized these days based on what I see here is that there's key questions that are posed at the beginning of each section, which tells the reader maybe you should be thinking about these questions as you read this text. So looking at these questions, I can predict what I'm going to be reading based on what they pose for thought here. So the first question asks about function. The last question talks about communication. So just from these questions, I can infer that cell walls and membranes are used for some type of communication from cell to cell, or and that I will be reading about what the function is of a cell boundary. And if we go further here, it says think about it. So I'll read this first paragraph here. When you first study a country, you may begin by examining a map of the country's borders. Before you can learn anything about a nation, it's important to understand where it begins and where it ends. The same principle applies to cells. Among the most important parts of a cell are its borders, which separate the cell from its surroundings and determine what comes in and what goes out. So when I read that paragraph there, I'm visualizing, I have viewed a map before, I have read a map before, I can visualize state to state borders based on a globe. And when I read that last sentence, where the border determines what comes in and what goes out, I think about diffusion in that second question of the key questions, and how do materials pass across cell membranes, okay? So I'm kind of predicting as well as making connections to the real world there and visualizing what these cell boundaries do on a day-to-day basis for a cell. So if I look at this question highlighted in blue, what are the functions of the cell membranes and cell walls? All cell walls are surrounded by a thin, flexible barrier known as the cell membrane. Cell membrane is sometimes called the plasma membrane because many of the cells in the body are in direct contact with the fluid portion of the blood. Well, being a scientific reader, I kind of want to skip all the little bits and pieces in between and kind of get to those questions and preview what I need to know before I read it. So if I skip down here to cell membranes, it says the composition of nearly all cell membranes is a double layered sheet called a lipid bilayer. So when I read that, I may not know what the term bilayer means, but if I look back in a sentence and kind of study the information presented to me, I see that there is a term here called, or that says double layered. So I'm thinking, the prefix bi means two, so bilayer probably means a double layered sheet, okay? And if I recall information on what I know about lipids, I know that a lipid molecule has a polar end and a nonpolar end. So that probably plays a key role in how this double layered sheet fits together, because polarity kind of attracts and repels certain things. So I'm thinking that the way this bilayer is arranged is very important in keeping cells separate from each other. When I go down to cell walls, I can see that, just from these two things being mentioned separately, cell walls and cell membranes, I know that they're probably not the same thing. They probably both are a type of boundary, but they are not the same type of boundary. Cell walls are present in many organisms, including plants, algae, fungi, and many prokaryotes. Cell walls lie outside the cell membrane. So just from that, I can tell that if a certain cell has a cell wall, it's going to encapsulate the entire cell, including the cell membrane. So just based on previewing this page of the chapter, I've used these 4 strategies, I think, pretty well. And they've helped me a great deal in trying to understand and recall information as I move forward in the text. And I think as a student, it really helps to know these things and be able to connect things with what you're reading and not just read through it just to get to the end assessment questions. Because most likely as you're reading it, and if you're making these connections, you've already been answering those assessment questions. So when you get there, it just is that much easier and faster to complete.